Oh, it's a great pleasure and surprise in some ways, since we've only become friends recently, to have a chance to talk to Alex Orlov. Alex, I always start by asking when and where you were born.
Mm-hmm.
So,
So I was born in Ukraine. I was born not in capital of Ukraine. There was a very nice region called Vinnytsia, and I was born in 1972. And after that, most of my life in Ukraine, I spent in Kiev. And now at that time, it was called in Russian way Kiev, and it's Kiev nowadays.
good. And then it'd be interesting to know, because we're deeply influenced by our families, something about your family. People often go back to their grandparents, sometimes longer. Tell me about your grandparents and then down to your parents.
Thank you. So my grandparents, of course, they went through the World War II. My grandfather was a doctor. He was a surgeon.
On your mother's side or father's?
This is on my mother's side.
Yeah.
And my grandfather lost a lot of relatives during the World War II. He couldn't find them, and probably they're killed. And after that, he became a professor, head of the department in the University of Medicine in Vinnytsia. And my grandmother was a pediatrician, and so it was an all medical family.
Hmm.
So she was actually a gynecologist, and so when I was born, my grandma was delivering me in the hospital.
Did you know them? Did they live on and you got to
Yeah,
know?
I had a chance to talk to them. My grandfather lived until he was 90.
Hmm.
Very wise, very patient, and he always was telling my mom, your son and my grandson will do great things in life. And so my mom keeps telling me or reminding me about his quote. And he said, like, well, if he saw you in Cambridge or in the States, he would be very proud of you.
And what about the other side?
The other side, again, my grandmother was a doctor, and my granddad, he was working in the police force, but he also had to hide some part of his background because they came from St. Petersburg. He came from St. Petersburg, and apparently he was connected to some noble family over there, and so during the Soviet time he was trying not to mention it or reveal that part of his background.
Have you ever found out what part of the noble family he was?
I still need to figure out, because it's easy to assume that based on my surname that I'm somehow connected to the lover of Catherine the Great, but I think it's not the case, because the family itself had some offshoots, and I think became Orlov Davidov. So I cannot really claim that connection, but at least some sort of nobility which was connected to my grandfather in St. Petersburg.
Right, so moving down to your parents, tell me about your father and mother.
So my mom is a doctor. She practiced medicine for 50 years. And my dad was, or he is still alive, he's an engineer. There's a family history which my mom revealed relatively recently. Because as a doctor of the police forces and firefighters, and she was in the hospital, she was sent to Chernobyl, to exclusion zone. In fact, when the nuclear station blew up, my father, because of his connections, he was able to get the Geiger counter. And so I remember my childhood when, after the explosion, we are not told that there was a radioactive contamination of food supply and others. We are going to market, and if you see the Geiger counter is off the scale, it means that you're not buying that particular vegetable or fruit. And because my mom was sent to that exclusion zone, she got a disability. The radiation levels were very high over there, and some of the firefighters died because of really high exposure to radiation, and they died within a couple of days. So as a result, when my mom came back, she decided not to have kids. So that's the only reason I'm the only child in the family.
I see. There's a wonderful film which you don't know called Chernobyl. I've quite forgotten who made it, but it was really very moving account of all this. Tell me something about your parents' character and how you think it's influenced you.
Well, my father, he was very focused on his job, and he thought it's important, and apparently had very high expectations, and in some families that result in the way or perception that your kid is a failure because your kid hasn't done this and that, and it's always pointed out. And so and my mom was really incredible in trying to smooth that and actually give me some confidence. And of course, my grandfather was the one who was telling me that doesn't matter what it is right now, you're going to do the great things in life. And so that somehow balanced that. But because of this environment, I also wanted to leave my house and move abroad, and that opportunity presented after the collapse of Soviet Union. And I didn't know English.
You were about 18.
Yeah, well, so that's, and I wanted to study English, and English wasn't taught well in schools, especially. That was an iron curtain before. And so, thanks God, there was a British Council office in Kyiv, and I was going there 5 hours every day studying English, and that's how I was able to get to American University afterwards.
Right. Well, let's go back to your early childhood. What is your first memory of a sort of definite kind that you think you remember, maybe were told, but and at what sort of age do you have a first memory or two?
It's difficult to say because I did not think my childhood was very happy, and so therefore, like, I probably intentionally raised a lot of memories. But I remember time with my grandfather because, again, it was a happy place. And I remember listening to his stories, and that's probably was the age of maybe 6. So I do not remember much before that.
Why was it not happy? What was it, the family or the environment? Or?
Well, it was particularly expectations that my father always thought that I am not achieving any of the things he thought I should. I wasn't particularly physically active. I wasn't good at sports, and my grades were great, but I didn't have many friends, and so just because I was limited in terms of how much time I can spend with anybody outside, and primarily I had to study. So that was the childhood, which wasn't, again, incredibly happy, but I think it was formative in many ways.
Yeah. When you were sort of that age, 6, 7, 8, did you have any particular hobbies or interests or passions, collecting or studying or reading or anything?
It was particularly, my passion was reading. I was devouring the books. I developed this technique where I can read the book very fast, and probably 100 pages would be consumed in maybe 3-4 hours, and so I was just reading.
What was your technique? Because I learned one of these fast reading techniques. But what was yours?
I cannot really define it. It just happened to be that I read all the books, and I was fascinated by medicine a little bit because I remember when I was in grandfather's apartment, there were books on anatomy, and you can kind of admire the really wonders of human body and the design. And that's what I remember.
And when you went to the school around the age of 11 or 12, that was, I don't know how they works there, but secondary school. One of the things that happens in England, to me and other English people, is that that's the time when they, a little later, they become confirmed. In other words, if they're Anglicans, Protestants, they make a vow to continue with their Christian. And that was the age that many people, including myself, went through our most religious sort of phase and then often dies out. So this is a way of asking about the influence of religion, because you were coming from an Orthodox Christian country.
Yes, but at that time, the communism wiped out the religious references. It wasn't encouraged to have any religious affiliation, and so therefore religion wasn't a big part of the society over there. So there wasn't a part. I think my mom wanted to baptize me, but that was after I left, and the reason she wanted to do that because she said, I would like to have this connection through God when you are far away, and so that's happened.
So you were baptized?
I was not baptized when I was a child. I think I was baptized when I was around 30.
Interesting. And has religion been at all important in the rest of your life or not?
It became important later, and especially during the difficult times in the previous 4 years. And I started helping the church in Manhattan, which happened to be a Ukrainian Orthodox church. And that's where I helped them with fundraising, some of the money for orphans back in Ukraine with physical and mental disabilities. And so that's kind of became the way to give back and maybe catch up on certain things which we missed when I was relatively young, and religion was really not encouraged in former Soviet Union in general.
So if you had to define yourself as roughly an agnostic, an atheist, or a believer, where would you place yourself on that scale?
Well, I would say I'm a believer, but I experienced many denominations, including Anglican Church, being here at King's, and going to Catholic Church when I was studying in the States because I wanted to understand the differences, and Orthodox Church, and so there are a lot of branches of Christianity which I explored.
When you were sort of 16, 17, I don't know whether you had to specialize. We did in our schools. We had to choose science or arts and humanities or something like that, and we began to discover what subjects we were enjoying most and had most aptitude. Did that happen with you?
Well, on one side I had two options. One of them to go into medicine, given that almost all of my relatives were medical doctors, or into engineering, where my father was very prominent. And I realized I would never be a doctor, for the reason is that if I see somebody in pain, I have a pain in the same place. I'm also, very compassionate, and therefore I thought I would never be able to be a doctor. Intellectually, I will be. In terms of skills, I think I would be a good doctor. But in terms of the burden of the decisions and the burden of pain, I would never be a doctor. So as a result, I have chosen an engineering field where I feel I have a little bit more control, but I haven't explored other fields because of that decision. And I started exploring them later when I had an undergraduate and graduate degree. And after that, I was asking myself a question: would I be a good economist? Would I be a good lawyer? And I answered them later through experience and taking some courses.
So moving on to, you said you weren't good at sports, so that wasn't too important in your childhood. were you interested in music at all?
I was interested in music, but because my parents forced me to play guitar and everything which is imposed on you, that normally doesn't create love or affection to a particular subject, and so therefore I played guitar, but that was pretty much it.
You played classical guitar, or
I played classical guitar, and especially some of the pieces which are relevant to 17th, 18th century, which wasn't that interesting, but I had to practice that. So
you weren't a member of a pop group or a skiffle group?
no. I wasn't proficient in that.
Well, that's easy, skiffle. But music, listening to music, has that been and remained important for you or not?
Well, absolutely, and that's experience here at Keynes and college choir was really transformative, and the choral music is just absolutely stunning. But again, I didn't have much of a chance to explore it when I was a kid, and so often you have regrets and you start looking into other areas where you think you might like them, and that's happened with music.
Did you listen? I mean, do you listen to music now, for example? Some people work by listening to music and in the background and so on. Others can't bear to mix the two. What about you?
Well, I try to find a particular type of music which gets me into, as I call, trance,
Yes.
where I forget about time and space, and I can work for many hours without realizing that it's already 3-4 hours past and I'm still working. So
do you do that actually listening to the music or getting yourself into the trance?
no, I'm listening to music, and after that I forget about time.
Okay. Right, very interesting. Okay, so let's go on to, well, there's one other thing that some people start at school, but usually at university, college, and that's politics.
Mm-hmm.
But I imagine in the Soviet Union at that time it wasn't something that you were encouraged to get involved with.
Yes, I mean that's like at that time Communist Party was very prominent, and so therefore that wasn't encouraged. And I remember like I was indoctrinated, I think by that particular ideology, because you don't think about this like everybody is doing the same thing. And I remember one of the first experiences when they opened the curtain, and it was a conversation with American audience, and it was, I'm trying to remember, I think it was Phil Donahue, one of the American hosts, who had this discussion between American and Russian or Soviet Union audience. And I remember listening to that exchange, and I was listening to answers from American audience, and I remember like thinking, well, it looks like they're reasonable people. I mean, it looks like I like them, but because of all of the previous experience and what you're told that West is evil, you start thinking there should be some flaw. I mean, I'm not supposed to like them. I'm not supposed to accept their point of view, but I think they're good people, and I would like to explore it, but you know I shouldn't. So that's why I know that you're influenced and blinded by that communist ideology.
Presumably, like everyone else, you had no idea that there would be sudden collapse of communism. Or did you have any sense that it was going to happen?
Well, it was a malaise. You can see the funerals of the top leaders of the Soviet Union, one after another. You get a sense when you hear Swan Lake. That's the time where somebody died of importance. It was played on TV all the time. So classical music of a particular type. So you know it was a malaise. You know that the food wasn't plentiful. There were some restrictions. So therefore, you realize something is wrong, but you couldn't formulate that. So that's probably was a kind of not a logical sense, but more of a well-being wasn't as good as before.
Was there a sense of widespread corruption?
You're not supposed to discuss it,
Hmm.
but I remember, again, coming back to Chernobyl and explosion, and that was a time of Gorbachev where perestroika and some of the changes were introduced, and kids were not evacuated for 2 weeks because they're not going to, they didn't want to admit what's happened. But I heard from my parents that the kids of the top communist leaders were evacuated, so they thought it's serious. And so corruption was there. People who would work abroad as diplomats or otherwise, they would have the special shops where you can buy goods which are not available to general population. And so you convert the pounds or dollars to special coupons, and you can buy those very incredible items which nobody can get. And so that was a corruption, but more in a subtle form rather than when it became rampant after the collapse of the Soviet Union.
And how soon after it collapsed did you go to America?
I think it was a number of years when Soros Foundation was established in Ukraine, when British Council established its own branch in Kiev, and the country started opening up, because I left Ukraine in 1995, so it was still in a period of time of 4 or 5 years, and the opportunities to study in the States or abroad were not available at that time, and I wanted to understand how it works. There was not much of the information, so I volunteered to work for Soros Foundation, so in their educational section, and in the meantime I was studying English in British Council using all the materials available. So that's how I was able to get a scholarship. I didn't have money to fly to the States, so again I got some support. I didn't have money to take tests such as TOEFL and GRE. Again, I was able to get support from Soros Foundation. This is how I ended up in the States.
And do you remember your first impressions arriving at the Statue of Liberty and so on?
Well, I arrived not to New York, I arrived to Chicago. And I remember that I was actually hosted in Ukrainian village in Chicago, and the faculty member who helped me a little bit, he was of Ukrainian origin and he was at the University of Michigan. So I remember Ukrainian diaspora and the way they're talking and their Ukrainian language, which was quite different from Ukrainian language in Ukraine. But I remember they saved me from one huge mistake. So when I studied English, I also had a book of slang, which was developed in Soviet Union without realizing that they based that particular book on the English used in prisons. And so, and when I was looking at this book, and I had to meet my supervisor, and I was thinking, how do you call somebody who is older? And this book recommended the word fossil. So I tested this with my Ukrainian hosts. I stayed a couple of days in Chicago, and before going to the University of Michigan, and say, Alex, like, if you call your supervisor this way, he would never talk to you. So they saved me from that particular mistake.
Old fossil. Did you find linguistic difficulties? I mean, you talked to these friends in a different kind of Ukrainian, but when you arrived, your English was fairly limited. Did you find it difficult or not?
It was extremely difficult because, first of all, I studied by myself. I didn't have a chance to practice conversational English. The way I taught myself to speak was reading the part of the book, and after that, trying to recite it. So I was basically talking to myself. You cannot really correct yourself if you talk to yourself. So I realized my English wasn't great. Before coming to the States, I could barely read a paragraph in English. and the school was extremely competitive. It's one of the best engineering schools in the country, and so
Which one was it?
University of Michigan Ann Arbor. So I had a very, very difficult time, and I also didn't realize that you're not supposed to take so many classes all at once, especially with limited English. And so I remember I took 5 classes, and it's almost killed me in the first semester, because one of the assignments was in one of the classes was to write 40 pages. And what I also realized, I'm not the best student there either, because there's so many bright students from all over the world, and American students as well, and therefore I struggled. And at the same time, I knew that if I fail, I have to go back. And so I remember one of my projects where I had to write 40 pages, and I stayed up 4 days without sleep. And I remember drinking 10 cups of coffee. And University of Michigan was actually quite interesting in the way that if you want to work or sleep in the libraries, you're provided with blankets and pillows. And if you really want to get a lot of things done, the nurse would provide you with caffeine tablets, which is, I'm not sure, one tablet is 6 cups of coffee. So that was my first year. So I slept probably 5 hours maximum every day during that year. And of course, it wasn't a happy memory, but I survived, and I managed to get the fellowship, so I didn't need to pay for my education. But my GPA was supposed to be very high, and so therefore I didn't have any choice.
But you got a high enough GPA at the end of the first year.
Yes.
In engineering.
In engineering.
Yeah. Which form of?
So the problem. So it was environmental engineering, but the problem with understanding which area of engineering I belong to was that the Soviet system is based on German academic setup, and there's not much of the alignment between the Soviet system and the American system, and so sometimes the disciplines are too narrow back in Ukraine or in Soviet Union. So therefore, I chosen the environmental field, and the reason I've chosen that because I knew that I would like to address environmental problems. I had this experience of Chernobyl and nuclear explosion and understanding the environmental implications, and I wanted to solve it, and that's why you're an engineer. In the States, environmental engineering is focused on water quality and how to treat water, and it's less focused on other areas such as air quality, which is a different type of engineering. So that ended up in that area, which was very beneficial, but my knowledge of chemistry wasn't the greatest one, and so I had to study microbiology, which again wasn't offered in my previous courses. So it was a very exciting, but at the same time extremely challenging time.
You obviously didn't have much spare time. You didn't go to jazz or plays or cultural events.
No, the first year was just horrendous. I only remember the library, and I don't remember anything else.
So you got through that, and then how was the second year?
The second year was easier. Again, at the time I was doing an advanced degree, and so I was a part of the group. My supervisor was fairly prominent, but at the same time, culturally, I wasn't very astute. Even in classes, I realized that a lot of American students, they study in groups, so they help each other to solve the problems, and they would collaborate, and I was a loner in that time, and so I always couldn't understand why I'm studying so hard, and I still have, my grades are not as high as some people in the class, and after that I realized you have to talk to teaching assistants, and if you ask them questions nicely, they might be able to help you to solve the homework problems. So there's a lot of cultural and other misunderstanding which I had to overcome.
Yeah. Were you beginning to enjoy being in America by then or not?
I did to a certain extent, because I didn't know anything better.
Mm.
You know, for me it was either Ukrainian system, American system. American system was very interesting and eye-opening, and the quality of science was incredible, and the quality of the university was really wonderful. It was a small city, and Arbor is a city of around 100,000, and so the cultural experience was going to Chicago. So that's pretty much it. But you know, you often feel suffocated in smaller cities, and so I wanted to expand my horizons. But I thought that's pretty much it. I am in the States. I would become American. There's nothing else, and so therefore I have to learn almost everything, from eating the fast food, which I didn't enjoy at the beginning, or behave in a particular way.
And presumably you didn't have the money to go back to Ukraine.
No, I didn't. And at the same time, I just wanted to overcome that attitude where, like, you know, where my dad was telling me when I was a kid that, you know, you wouldn't be able to achieve much. And so therefore, like, you know, I feel that if I come back, like, there would be something else where, like, you know, he would try to find, like, you know, the way to.
And then it's a 3-year degree, is it?
No, so in the States, I started my master's and PhD. My previous experience was in Ukraine, where I studied at the National University over there, which was quite a prominent one, because that's where Sikorsky, who was a very significant engineer who designed helicopters, was a student. Mendeleev, who was instrumental in designing the periodic table. He was also examiner at that institute. So I spent some time over there before coming to the States.
So in effect, you were on a postgraduate.
It was postgraduate course.
Yeah,
yes.
I see. And so it evolved through a master's into a doctorate.
It started evolving into doctorate, and in the States you have a qualifying exam. So I passed the qualifying exam, which is basically a gate to go through the advanced studies. And at some point I thought that I need to have more knowledge of chemistry, and I managed to find the scholarships to spend 1 year in Cambridge, and this is how I came here.
Why Cambridge?
I heard a lot about it. I found there are some strong groups in a particular area of science which was interesting to me, and especially in chemistry department. And so I thought that this knowledge would complement my PhD. So I decided to do MPhil by research, and so I didn't need to take classes, and therefore I spent a year over here, which was really incredible and eye-opening experience, because I realized there's a different type of educational system. There's a different type of societies, which are, of course, British way of life is quite different from the American one, and so I found that was really incredible year, very happy year. I remember, like, when I came here, one of my supervisors asked, said, like, you know, Alex, the social life is important. How's your social life? And I look at him, like, I said, well, nobody in the States asked me about if you have a social life or whether it's important. And that was quite wonderful. I mean, I realized, you know, you can be very productive, but you do not need to spend all the time in the library, or you do not need to have this artificial competition with your lab mates. You can be cooperative, and you can be happy and can be productive at the same time.
Did you come to King's then, or not?
No, I was in different college. I was in Trinity Hall.
Trinity Hall.
Yes.
That year.
Yes.
Well, I was going to ask about the differences that you noticed then, and we've noticed each time we come back to Cambridge, between American academic life. Perhaps it's unfair to talk about then and now in America, because it's changed a lot even here. But at that time, you mentioned one or two more collegial, more relaxed. Were there other things about the difference?
Well, the difference was in many ways. A lot of times in the States, you're supposed to promote yourself. You're supposed to mention your accomplishments, and understatement is considered not a good thing. Whereas when you come to Cambridge, you realize there are incredible number of very smart, very accomplished individuals, and they're not talking about themselves all the time, and you realize it through other people or reading their papers that they're really incredible. But for me, that was extremely refreshing.
And the relationship to your teachers, was that different in the two places?
Again, it's difficult to generalize it, but there was a big barrier between American faculty member who might not see students that often. But again, you cannot generalize because there are some incredible faculty members who are like working with students on a very close basis. So, but over here, it's just different and often more humane in a way. And so I realized there's a different way to study, and there's a different way to come up with new ideas, and it's not always that American way of life is the best one.
When you went back after a year, and then
Yes.
what did you do then? You did the PhD, or?
No, so when I went back to the States after all the knowledge I was able to get from this 1 year experience, I realized my supervisor told me, well, listen, you've done a great job for your PhD so far, but I have a different source of funding, and I'm going to redirect your dissertation in a completely different direction, and so therefore you cannot use the results you obtained for the last 2 years. And so, when I was in Cambridge, I came up with a couple of ideas, and I was able to help my supervisor to write the grant proposals, and the funding came to Cambridge. So I had a decision to make whether I'll spend another 3 or 4 years finishing my PhD, or I can come to Cambridge and have a flexibility of exploring the subject which I've chosen. And so the idea was to come to Cambridge and interrupt my PhD in the States, which was a difficult decision because I remember talking to a number of colleagues or a number of professors and say, Alex, you shouldn't do that. Your supervisor is well known. If you stay and persevere, you would have a very prominent academic career, and you're going to England, and it's not a guarantee that you would ever get a faculty position in the States, so you shouldn't do that. I decided still to come to Cambridge because for me, exploring your ideas and doing something you love is more important. Whether if I never got the faculty position in the States, it's that would be okay.
Interesting. So you came here, did a PhD in chemistry.
Yeah, I did my PhD in chemistry.
Who was your supervisor?
It was Richard Lambert.
How was he as a supervisor?
He was very energetic. He was helping students. He gave me flexibility in exploring subject because some of it was based on in overlap between engineering and chemistry, given my engineering background. So I was able to explore it, and that's was quite productive time and also happy time.
Was that when you came to King's or another college? Did you stay?
So I finished my PhD, and I was lucky to get a fellowship at King's.
So your PhD was at Trinity Hall, and then
My research fellowship was at King's.
then you got a JRF,
Yes.
and Junior Research Fellowship at Cambridge. In non-technical language, what was your PhD about?
So my PhD was about materials which can help with environmental protection. And the idea is that if you expose those materials to light, what they can do, they can destroy different hazardous molecules. And so that's was the idea. And you explore the size, you explore the composition, and it can show how you can use them either for cleaning up the water or you can clean up the air. And that was the general area. In technical terms, I was working in physical chemistry, and more specifically, I was looking at the interfaces, what is happening between gas and solid and liquid. And so that was my area of research. And it was, given the nature of the grant, it was collaboration with the engineering department over here.
Yeah. And then did you come straight to a junior research fellowship at
I did.
Yeah.
I did.
Which was 4 years or 3 years?
It was 4 years, but I stayed only for 3 because I got a faculty position offer from Stony Brook University, and so I decided to interrupt, which was a difficult decision because I would consider incredible, very productive years which were spent over here, and I wanted to enjoy all of the benefits, but I realized that it was time to go to the next level. Again, that was really a wonderful time, and coming back to it often.
Can you sort of identify any particular people in Cambridge, King's Fellows or others who you became close friends or worked with over that period?
There are many. And what is interesting is that I was able to explore ideas in general which are not necessarily related to chemistry. They can be anthropology, such as Carrie Humphrey, with whom we had a lot of interesting discussion. One of the projects which I pursued at King's was related to some of the reactions in the atmosphere. And I remember the anthropology student in Carrie Humphrey's group who was smuggling the sand from Gobi Desert because we wanted to know, how the things are happening in the atmosphere. And apparently we needed to have a sample of the sand, and this is the wonderful story which probably Carrie can tell you in a better ways, where we paid for this girl to go on a camel to the middle of a desert with a shovel and then take the sand and store it. But the problem was it was a winter, and the camel didn't want to go, so they had to get a car to do that. And after that, we realized that the Mongolian government doesn't want to have any sand or taken out of the country, despite the fact there are millions of tons of the sand is transported through the atmosphere because of the desert storms, and so we almost had to smuggle it out of Mongolia. so that's an interesting interdisciplinary collaboration with anthropology, for example, which I don't think would ever happen if I were in the States, because it's so unusual. And again, there are so many fellows to mention, but I remember being at high table or being having discussion about the subject which I didn't know much, but it was exciting, and this collegiality and absence of this drive to self-promote, that was really incredible.
Absence of competition or direct competition, and a lot of trust and friendship.
Yes.
That's all nice. Then you went back to America, to Stony Brook.
Yes, but they even a couple of things which I was able to explore when I was here was one of the topic where I became advisor to DEFRA, Department of Environmental, Food and Rural Affairs, and I was advising them on hazardous substances and nanotechnology, and looking at the way the government operates, and watching Prime Minister, yes Minister, to understand how civil service works in the UK. So that was a interesting time. I also was able to facilitate the establishment of the Ukrainian society over here at the student level, and eventually through the fundraising it was possible to establish the Ukrainian language studies, which developed into the Ukrainian academic field over here. So there are a lot of things which I was able to explore then when I was here as a GRF.
Was that the time when you also were involved with advising David Cameron and the government?
Yes, so that was time where one of the Cambridge alumni, Oliver Latvin, connected with me. I'm not sure how exactly it happened, but I was invited to be on the group which was developing the innovation policy for the next government, and it was just before the elections. And again, I ended up on working with fairly prominent individuals. Probably the least important one there, Ian Taylor, who was a chief science advisor to, or he was a science minister in John Major's government, and there are some other people from Parliament or European Parliament. So it was again a very interesting experience over there.
And then when you went back, just to anticipate, you also got involved with politics in the United States, or at least advising, being somehow connected to people like Chuck Schumer and Blinken and so on.
Well, the American politics was again something I really wanted to explore, because being in the Soviet Union and not understanding how American politics works, but that was during my time as a graduate student. So I remember I got the fellowship and to be in the Office of Democratic Whip of Congress, which is the second most important position after the leader of the Democratic majority or minority. And so I remember spending time for 1 month in DC in that office. What probably helped that the David Bonnier, who was at that time the Democratic whip, he was of Ukrainian origin. And what I realized that in Michigan, that's where I was based, there's a significant number of Ukrainians. In fact, I was told, I'm not sure whether it's true or not, that the presidential campaigns in Michigan often started at Ukrainian Center in Detroit, so near Detroit. And so that was Ukrainian connection before that, and so I saw the American politics on the inside. The interesting story which came from the second fellowship which I spent in the Congressional Science Committee was about understanding of science. And at that time, NASA wanted to establish the asteroid defense program. So the idea is that
Star Wars.
Yeah, it's almost like a Star Wars, where if you see the asteroid which can destroy Earth, you would shoot it or somehow deflect it. And I remember coming to this presentation from NASA, and that was very high-level administrator. And I was expecting a lot of science. It's you need to demonstrate why you need to have billions of dollars to design this very sophisticated system. And I was in shock when they opened that particular presentation for staff members of members of Congress and Congressional Science Committee by showing the clip of the movie Armageddon, where Bruce Willis is implanting the explosive on the asteroid to destroy it. And for years I couldn't understand it. I thought, well, NASA is a serious agency. They can use numbers and probability everything else. But later on, I realized that it was the right approach because most of the members or staff members, they do not have a science background. Members of Congress, normally you have maybe 3 or 4 members of Congress who has a science degree. And so therefore that was the right approach. But only last year, I decided to check whether that approach was successful or not. And I realized that actually NASA was able to get funding. So Bruce Willis was very instrumental in saving our planet, because that was the best way to demonstrate the importance of a particular idea.
Interesting. Going back to Stony Brook, you obviously started on tenure track, and then you had to raise large sums in grants and projects, and then you got tenure finally, and you're a full professor there. When we were talking recently, you were telling me a lot about modern academic life in America, on Stony Brook and so on. How are things in American academia now, as you witness them?
Well, again, often it's difficult to generalize because there are different type of academic institutions that are more established, including Columbia, which has a name of King's College in the past, and you have state institutions which are often underfunded, and the state funding is going away. You have incredible number of institutions which are probably going to disappear because of financial reasons. But when I talk to my colleagues who've been in academia for a long time, they see significant trends, and the trends is in terms of funding has been stagnant. In terms of emphasis, where now it's often your productivity is often measured in number of grants, amount of money you bring, in number of publications, rather than groundbreaking ideas. And that's, to a certain extent, is not right, because if you think about some of the most prominent scientists and try to apply the criteria applied to tenure process, they would fail. Some of the most prominent Nobel Prize winners, they had only maybe 15 publications, and citation index wasn't great based on the number of publications, and so therefore they would never get a tenure in the modern system, and they probably didn't raise that much money. So the emphasis becoming more and more, I think it's going away from the creativity aspect. And so I think that's the difference. I know that there are some trends in British academia which are similar, but I hope that this emphasis on excellency and creativity is more important than on money, because again, that money and creativity can be correlated, but not often it's the case.
And also what we've referred to before, but you also talked about the relations between people within these academic institutions, that there's much less trust and much more competition and dispute over resources and so on in America than still the case here. Is that right?
Yes, I mean the aspects which you find at King's, which is collegiality and creativity in many ways, and helpfulness to others. I mean, that's often wouldn't get you very far in American institutions. Now, there's a realization among many academic members that they need to have the fabric, they need to have this collaborative nature, and they try to recreate it in some rudimentary ways. For example, in our university, they decided to establish the faculty club, where people would go and dine together. Essentially, didn't work out. It didn't, because people were not coming to that space, and they still were spending time in enclaves of the engineering or arts or others. So recreating this fabric, which you can see in colleges over here, is extremely difficult, because the on the intellectual level and at the level of funding agencies, they talk about interdisciplinarity. They have a term transdisciplinarity. They have a term of convergence. That's the terms which National Science Foundation in the States is using. But in the meantime, it's difficult to force it unless you have the culture of that. And my impression that there's a culture like this exists over here, but like, recreating it, it's very complicated. I know that some universities can do that, but it feels almost like there's a magic involved. You need to have a certain ingredients which can promote that. And often in American universities, you don't see that.
Just a couple of more topics that I want to ask you about. One is going back to your research, reading through your website or the website with your interests, for example, that making a lot of environmental improvements to getting rid of CO2 and having self-sustaining green technologies and so on. Can you pick out, you have 4 or 5 that are listed there, can you pick out 1 or 2 which you think are the most important areas where your work is going to help us escape from where we are?
It's difficult because often there are creative scientific ideas, but they might never be scalable. And in the meantime, there are ideas which you can tweak the existing technologies, and the societal impact can be significant. So in terms of significant impact, there's an area where we are discovering how you can reuse the concrete, and you can transform the way the buildings are built and how the materials are utilized. So for example, concrete cannot be easily recycled, and some technological problems and how to overcome it. So that's the area which we are exploring right now, and it just got the funding to use the 3D printing to create shelters in Ukraine, and this is something which I think is important from the point of view of the society. But there are some very interesting creative ideas where you can use the materials such as metals, and if you can chop them into very small sizes, of size of maybe 10 atoms, their properties are dramatically different. So one of the examples might be King's College Chapel. So if you look at the stained glass windows, this is the first ever application of nanotechnology, because 500 years ago, when people used pigments, they would give those vivid colors, which are actually now understood to be based on the nanoparticles in there. And so what we, in our research, what we are doing, we are trying to create them artificially and utilize them for transforming carbon dioxide into valuable chemicals, or taking hydrogen from water using sunlight. But this is very interesting area because there's a lot of discussion about those very small objects and how they can harm the human health. And in fact, that's again a fascinating area. I had a chance to give a lecture in British Parliament on the nanotechnology and the promise and the danger of that. And I remember when I finished my presentation, and that was about all the wonderful things which this new technology can do for the humanity. Most of the questions were about the nanorobots taking over the earth, or the concept of gray goo, which is going to destroy the humanity. And this is the interesting area where you have an overlap between promise of science and technology to solve the problems, including the climate change, and the aspects of public health and how the new materials can actually harm the environment. And this is bringing together my experience in policy and advising on hazardous substances, engineering, how to create something new, and also public perception of science and technology and how to manage that.
And on balance, are you hopeful that some of these scientific discoveries and so on are going to solve, or at least mitigate seriously the problems we're facing, or do you feel, in other words, are you optimistic or pessimistic about how things are?
Well, I'm optimistic about technology and optimistic about the solutions, but what engineers often do not realize that they can have the most creative solution and potentially scalable, but if the public is not ready, if the policymakers have concerns, in this case, you won't be able to push it through. But scientists and engineers start realizing that they need to have all this broad spectrum of understanding, having engineering solutions, but after that, how you would scale up. And that's where most of the startups and technological solutions fail. So this is on scalability. But even if you can scale it, but you cannot explain to public why it is safe, why it is important and better than everything else, that solution would not be available. So the idea now is to work with humanities and social sciences and engineers and psychologists and sociologists to promote those technological solutions, whether it's changing behavior, how we consume the materials, or whether we are willing to adopt the new technologies based on those nanomaterials which sound very exotic and unknown. And the reason is there is a lot of discussion about those very small objects is related to the fact that if you don't see the danger, if it's not obvious, we're really horrified by that particular one. Radiation is one. You don't see it, but people would die because of the high exposure to radiation. And for many, those nanoparticles or nano objects are the same. You don't see them, and so therefore you project certain things on them, and that's why there's a resistance to adoption of the either new technologies or new materials.
Broadening out from the particular work you do, you seem to be, you're a member of a number of different faculties, you're on a number of boards, you've got several companies, you are doing pioneering research. How do you manage to combine all these things? You're no longer spending your whole time in libraries, but enjoying life as well. So how do you organize your life to achieve so much and keep so much going?
Well, one of the way to do that is to learn a couple of simple management principles, and one of them is to delegate, because you cannot do it all by yourself, and there are people smarter than you who can do it better. And it's also the principle that often taught in the business school, which is if you want to get somebody to do the work, it's a principle of the hands, brain, and heart. So if you really want to change your organization, or if you want to incentivize students, what you do, you explain why it is important, and this is your brain. You try to have emotional connection, why this research is important, and you can say it's saving the world, it's making others better, and you give them tools. So it means this is hands, and you try to teach certain things. So those skills are important, and I learn them over time. I learn them based on my mistakes, and I'm not saying that everything I do is going to be successful, but at least I try, and so that's what matters.
When you said delegate, do you have personal assistants and secretaries and people who are working for you, or?
Not that much, because again, we are it's a state university, very, very interesting in the way that it's only 60 years old, and of course from Cambridge perspective it's almost nothing. But we have students, and I work with students and researchers, and that's how I get a lot of things done. Administrative support is often not as significant as it is in Cambridge, but you just navigate this and do your best, and so this is how we can get certain things done.
How many hours a day do you work on average?
It depends, but often it can be 60, 70 hours.
A week?
Not a day, but a week. But
60 or 70?
Yeah, so it's like often it can be like 10, 12 hours per day.
It's quite a lot. Right, just turning to the last thing. I mean, we're discussing this in the context of a recent difficult event in your Ukrainian life. So you've been watching, because your parents are in Ukraine, what's happening there. So I wondered if you had any reflections on what caused all this, where it's going, etc. Anything you wanted to say?
Well, as you know, yesterday was a particularly difficult day, right? Where it was a massive attack, including on hospital, the children's hospital in Ukraine, which is the biggest one, and that's where one of my relatives work. Or yesterday, I received a phone call from my parents saying that the windows in their apartment were blown off because of the explosion of the rocket. So it's an extremely difficult time, and that was a very difficult 3 years. In the meantime, for me, it's an interesting parallel between something which my grandparents experienced in World War II and what my parents are experiencing at this stage. And by connection, I'm also feeling that is that humans are amazing in adapting and normalizing the most abnormal things. Ukrainians are resilient. They still navigate their lives despite all the horrors. In the meantime, what you see a unique part of the nation building, where the identity of Ukraine was undermined and smeared over 100 years of being part of the either Russian Empire or the Soviet Union, and you can see the formation of the nation, which is trying to understand their identity and hopefully would survive this horrible war. So people are discovering the sides of them which they never had a chance to experience, and so for me, I have a huge admiration towards Ukrainians. I'm trying to help to a small extent, as much as I can, but also in a strange way, it helps me to understand the history. Now, when I read the history books about the World War II, or see the interviews of somebody who experienced the war, I have a much better understanding and emotional connection to that part of the history, because it's repeating itself, unfortunately. I heard the quote that historians are probably some of the most depressed people in the world, because they know how the things been in the past and they can see a little bit of the future, but nobody listens to them.
Well, economics is meant to be the dismal science, but history can be that as well. I mean, further to that, given the current situation and what's happened over this time, do you feel there are glimmers of hope, or do you feel it'll just go on in a stalemate or worse?
Well, there are obviously military solutions, but I cannot comment on them. It looks like it's going to go for a long time. You don't see changes in the Russian attitude in a significant extent. You don't see the changes in resolve of Ukrainians, because every time they're bombed, it's not going to scare them. It's going to make them stronger. So this stalemate, unfortunately, would continue, and military solutions are not the best one, but the alternative is even worse. Ukrainians experienced Holodomor, which is the time when the food was taken out of Ukraine. It was after the revolution, and millions of Ukrainians and kids died, and that was horrible time. If Ukraine is going to be a part of Russia, it's something unimaginable for many people, because they see what is happening now, even with bombing of the children's hospital, and they know that just they don't want to be part of the evil empire anymore.
Right. Well, we've come to the end, but is there anything you would have liked me to ask you that we haven't talked about it so far? Personal life or anything else?
No, I think we covered a lot of topics, and I wish we can talk a little bit more about King's and its influence and all of the wonderful things around the college.
What do you think is, just because it's always nice to talk about King's, what, above all, if you had to name the 2 or 3 things that you love about this place, as I do too, what would they be?
I think the fellowship and the choir, and everything else, from architecture to beautiful landscape, that's playing into those 2 strengths. So incredible fellowship, friendship, which lasts for a lifetime, and just beautiful environment supported by incredible music.
That's a very nice note to end on, and we look forward to having you back again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.